your host, Sean Lynn, in the pub for a Dram with Friends, where we talk about faith, family, food, and fun. Pull up a chair and I'll pour you a drink. Episode 42. We welcome our new friend, Peter Baltutis, to the pub. We'll hear how his love for St. Francis helped him find his vocation. Welcome to another episode of A Dram with Friends. We are extremely happy to welcome a new friend into the pub, Peter Baltutis from St. Mary's University here in Calgary. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much. It is an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
So, for our audience, who is Peter Baltutis?
That's a long, a short question that needs a long answer. I'll do my best to be succinct for you. As you mentioned, I am an associate professor of both history and religious studies, and I hold the Catholic Women's League Endowed Chair of Catholic Studies here at St. Mary's University in Calgary. So I am a professor. My PhD is actually in church history, but I'm also a father. I'm a proud husband and father. I have 3 children. I also recently rescued a dog, so I feel like I have 4 children now, which is wonderful. Avid outdoor enthusiast. I love all things camping and hiking. I'm a huge sports fan as well, so admiring your jersey as we're speaking. You let me know where you want to go next, because I can talk for a long time, but I don't want to bore your audience either.
There you go. Well, I forgot to, but you're still in the office working, so my understanding is you're probably not going to join us for a dram, but I'm pouring an Arran 10-year-old single malt scotch whiskey. One of the online personalities picked it for his favorite whiskey for 2020, so it's nice. Seems like a good reason to pour one. And a dram's not a lot of whiskey. It's only 1/8 of an ounce, but I put a little more because it's hard to get that little into a glass. So,
well, it's I have to say, as someone who spent many years studying theology, especially in the Catholic tradition, most events end up with people sharing whiskey, and I've tried it. It just doesn't quite. It's not my preferred beverage. I'm at the office. If I was out at home, or perhaps I was in the pub with you in person, my preferred drink of choice is I'm a huge fan of hard ciders. I had a chance to spend a semester abroad in France. I was in northwestern France, in the region we call Brittany. And up there, the regional drink is hard cider. So I got hooked on hard ciders. And actually, my wife's family, they come from, she grew up in the Okanagan. And I recently found in the Okanagan an amazing organic local hard cidery. It's called Upside Cider. So if I did have a beverage, it would have been an Upside Cider, which I love. But I just came from the gym, so I have with me in my water bottle, this is homemade lemonade. So it is a beverage, a nice treat after the gym. I wish it was alcoholic, but it's just regular lemonade for today.
There you go. Well, I'm going to have to go check that out because we spend a lot of time in the northern Okanagan region. Our daughter lives in Grinrod, which is, I'm sure you've passed the hubcap place going to Kelowna.
And that's right. My wife, she was born in Kamloops, grew up in Revelstoke, but then she moved when she was in grade 6 to Kelowna. And then her brother and his family are all in Kelowna still, so we go there at least once a year. And we go there, we always make sure we spend some time either. My wife is from French background, so we try and find some time for the vineyards, or for me, the cideries. So.
Oh, right on. Yes. Michelle and I toured a few of the wineries out there last summer. Just now that I'm at the other end of the spectrum with the kids are starting to grow up. We were down to one at home here because our 18-year-old was in Ireland doing a mission trip with Next Ireland. Our next one was going to university in Edmonton. He's now home for the summer, and then another one that was living on his own, but he's moving back in because he's going to go to SAIT this fall. So we're going from one to four in a matter of weeks here. So So what Catholic study? That's I know when I was helping out St. Mary's University early on, that was one of our hopes, was to make it a Catholic university rather, because unfortunately a lot of the more famous ones south of the border have lost that Catholic identity to some sense. So I'm happy to see a young guy that's on fire for bringing the Catholic faith and studying it and the history that it brings. So what brought you to study Catholic history?
So I was born in Toronto to a family of to a family of immigrants. So actually, my father, he was born in a displaced persons camp. His parents, my paternal grandparents, they came from Lithuania. So my last name, Baltutis, is a Lithuanian name.
Okay.
And he eventually came and settled in Canada when he was around 6 years old. My mother, she was born in Canada, but her parents came from the Ukraine. So they grew up both in Sudbury, Ontario, but they then both moved independently to Toronto. They got married there, and I was born in Toronto. But when I was 5, I moved to the United States. So I grew up on Long Island, New York, just outside New York City. I did kindergarten up through grade 12 there. I went to university down at a school called University of Richmond in Virginia, so a small liberal arts university. But for me, I think one of the most pivotal moments is my parents, who both, my father, who was Catholic, my mother, who was raised in the United Church, but became a Catholic to marry my father and raised us in the Catholic tradition. We were very, I would say, culturally Catholic, if you will. My father would attend Mass, my mother often wouldn't. But both of them really instilled in us a strong sense that spirituality is important. And that was really something that I think I appreciate later on in life, is they were always pushing us to seek and to learn and ask questions. But it was I was in high school. I was lucky enough in the States. My parents sent my brothers and I to a private Catholic high school called St. Anthony's High School, and it was run by a group of Franciscan friars.
Oh, wow.
And that was really influential, because when I was in my teenage years, and I really now started to figure out, is this a tradition I want to claim for my own? Am I doing these motions because I'm doing it because it's expected of me, or do I actually believe these things? And as I was discerning that process, I began to look around and paid close attention to the Franciscan friars that ran the high school I went to. And the two things that stuck out to me was, one, these friars, these people that consecrated their life to God, were extremely intelligent. In the U.S., they were teaching all of our AP courses, all of our honors courses. So these are people that were deeply learned. And that was important to me. But perhaps even more importantly, number two, is that they were extremely joyful. So the idea of really intelligent, but also just this exuberant sense of faith that just made them attractive, charismatic people. And so those things kind of always stuck with me. And then so I went off to university, and I was really always fascinated by history, hence my long-winded answers to your short questions. And so when I was at university, well, a lot of amazing things happened, but I was a history major. As I mentioned, I had a chance to study abroad. I went to France for 6 months to learn the French language. And being in Europe really left a huge mark on me. I was really just captivated by all the history that was there. But also, I was lucky that my paternal grandfather, the one that originally came from Lithuania and ended up in Canada, I went with him back to Lithuania and spent a month there connecting with my distant family. And that was shortly, a few years after Lithuania was recently independent from Soviet occupation. So seeing that country kind of coming back to life and celebrating its Lithuanian identity, which is very closely tied to its Catholicity, those are really important. And so I was really fascinated by all these questions of history. But when I was finishing university, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. I was kind of discerning what was happening. And I should mention that when I was in high school, I began to really seriously consider a vocation to the priesthood, specifically to the Franciscans. So I was discerning religious life. I wasn't sure what the next step was in terms of my academic career. So it just so happened that one of the Franciscans that I was very close with, he was a Capuchin Franciscan. He invited me to be involved in a program called the Capuchin Volunteer Corps. And essentially what they did is the Capuchins had a retreat center in upstate New York where they took 6 young people, and the 6 of us, we were 3 men, 3 women, all college graduates, and we lived in an intentional community, and we helped this one friar run this extremely active retreat center. So for me, that was a part of myself wanting to discern religious life more closely, but also during my years of academic study, for better or for worse, I was so focused on academics, I was neglecting my spiritual life. So a chance to be intentionally investing in my spiritual life was one that was enormously fruitful. So I did a year of volunteer with the Franciscans, and I still wasn't sure what the next step was. And I happened to meet a fairly prominent church historian, a person named Father Regis Armstrong. And Regis Armstrong is a Capuchin friar, and he's one of the foremost scholars on the life of St. Francis of Assisi.
Oh, wow.
So if you often see primary source documents of Francis, they're often edited or translated by Father Regis Armstrong. So here I met this person who was a devoted Capuchin friar, but also was an intellectual. So I was curious to want to pursue the intellectual life a bit further. So I went to the University of Toronto and did a 1-year Master of Arts program in history. And while I was in Toronto, I had the chance to, an amazing opportunity, I lived at a place called the Newman Centre. And the Newman Centre, for those that don't know, Newman Centres are often Catholic chaplaincies on university campuses. But at the University of Toronto, the Newman Centre is such a large enterprise. It's a chaplaincy. It's also a Catholic parish for the Archdiocese of Toronto, but it's also a Catholic residence. So I was one of 11 individuals who lived at the Newman Centre as part of an intentional community, and we were both undergrad and graduate students. And in exchange for living in a gorgeous mansion in the center of campus, in exchange also for having a low room and board rate, we as young adults were empowered to work in the chaplaincy and in the parish ministries. So that was a great chance to really deepen my spiritual life. I was studying at University of Toronto, which was an amazing center of learning. But after a year of doing my master's, all these things were coming to a head. I realized while I was doing well academically, I wasn't as excited about pursuing history as I thought perhaps I could have or should have been. And I was still wrestling with this question about a vocation. How can I best use my gifts and talents to serve God? So I was very, very close to signing up to join the postulancy, to discern formally with the Capuchin Franciscans. But just as I was actually filling out my application, our pastor at the time, Father Pat, at the Newman Centre, and this was right after World Youth Day in Toronto in 2002. And he says, we want to capitalize on this dynamic energy that's happening in our parish, in our city, in our archdiocese. He says, Peter, you have a background in retreat experience. Can you help me design a retreat for young adults? So I helped him design this young adult retreat, a weekend retreat. And it was on that retreat that I met my future wife. So I realized that God was calling me to really to be a committed married man, to be a biological father. I always wanted to have children. So when I met someone I fell in love, I still had that desire to serve God in some way. So to bring all this together, I said I still want to serve God, and I can do that by studying theology. So I did a second Master of Arts now in Catholic theology, and then my PhD bridged my undergrad degree in history, my master's in history, my second master's in Catholic theology, and my PhD was in the history of Christianity.
Wow.
So I combined both together. And then, so after I finished my second master's, I got married. My wife worked as a lawyer in Toronto. She was a Crown prosecutor at the time. And we had 2 children in Toronto, which was wonderful. And then I graduated. I was hired by a small Catholic college called Corpus Christi College. It's on the campus of UBC in Vancouver.
Okay.
So we picked up from Toronto, moved to Vancouver. And when I was teaching there, that was only a contract position. And then, by the hand of God, this amazing opportunity opened up here at St. Mary's in Calgary. They wanted somebody that could both teach in their history department, because we just had launched a brand new 4-year degree in history, and they wanted someone to help build a new Catholic studies department. So because my background was in both history and theology, I applied for the job, was hired. So we moved to Calgary in 2014. And then shortly after we moved here, my wife found work with the province of Alberta. So we both found work in our chosen fields. And then we had our third child, our youngest child, was born here in Calgary. So yeah, and to pick up on another point you mentioned earlier, Sean, when I was first hired by St. Mary's, I remember meeting with our president, Dr. Jerry Turcotte, and he was sort of just meeting with me and explaining to me how happy he was to have you on campus. But he told me one thing, I'll never forget it. He said, Peter, he says, what I would really love for you to do is to help our university recommit and rediscover its Catholic identity. Not that we weren't doing that already, but to be much more intentional about it. So it's been my joy and privilege since I've been here it feels like 7 weeks. It's been 7 years already. But since I've been here, we've now created a brand new 4-year degree in Catholic studies. I've designed and I now bring students on travel study courses to Rome.
Wow.
I've created an experiential learning course in Catholic social teachings where our students are here doing the work of charity and justice in our city. So we have a lot of exciting things happening at St. Mary's that are not only educating them intellectually, but I believe forming young people to know and be excited about what the Catholic faith can offer them moving forward.
That's awesome. Yeah, I actually did see a posting that I was tempted to. You're hiring a Catholic chaplain or no, it wasn't a chaplain. It was
Our Director of Campus Ministry.
Director of Campus Ministry, but
That's right. That's a brand new job posting. They just posted a couple of days ago. So if any of our viewers out there, either perhaps they may have the skill set or they may know of someone, this is our campus ministry. Since I've been here, it's just been growing and growing, and so that position will be a really key hire for us because we want our students to not just be, as I said, formed intellectually in the classroom, but also have the opportunity to explore their spirituality and discover it and live it out all on our campus life. And the campus ministry will be a huge linchpin for that.
Well, and that's where God Squad, we like to come in and support that because we want to reach the young men and encourage them in their faith walk rather than having men my age with gray hair saying, I wish I'd done this. We want to encourage men to do that, to embrace God's plan in their life and know that no matter where you end up, whether a professor, your wife's a lawyer, you still have a job within the faith to fulfill God's will in your areas of expertise. And I'm quite excited to hear that you're making those strides and progress there. So I took a course there back in 2000. I took an ethics course from Ernie McCullough. And,
Yes.
and that was my partner that I was working night shift with. We'd come into the class during the day, and I think those poor kids got a lot more of a challenge from some older gentlemen. But Ernie was great because he loved having that interaction and that debate where others might have shied away from having open and honest dialogue. And in today's world, that is what we need most, where too many campuses are, you can't say this, you can't say that. Well, how are kids going to learn to have that dialogue and find that common ground and learn?
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right, Sean. And that's part of our mandate at St. Mary's University is, one, our hallmark is these small class sizes where students are able to interact with the material and with each other. And that's important, not just in terms of the content they're learning, but also learning how to think critically, listen to other people, and actually engage in, what I tell my students is, engaging in the art of civil discourse, learning how to engage in argumentation in a way that doesn't disrespect or dehumanize people, but actually to listen to them and respond to them. And if you look at all of the great heroes in our Catholic intellectual tradition, if you go all the way back in the Acts of the Apostles to St. Paul, when St. Paul travels to Athens, he goes there, and the first thing he does is, before he begins preaching, now he has the truth, he knows this amazing message, but the first thing he does is he looks around and he listens to the debate that's happening, and then he says, okay, now that I see and hear you, let me explain to you in words that you understand, to the Athenians, what you're not quite grasping about this person of Jesus. And that's the real secret of evangelization, is listening and being able to communicate effectively. And that's one of the key goals of a liberal arts education, how to think critically, write critically, and speak clearly. And also, as you mentioned at St. Mary's, you mentioned the course in ethics. So at St. Mary's, we have what's called our liberal arts core. So regardless of your major, all students take a year-long course in literature, learn how to read critically, a year-long course which I teach in what's called the history of ideas. So you're learning about the great thinkers, philosophers, economists, political scientists, philosophers, all these towering intellectual figures. We learn about what they're contributing to our Western tradition. Then students also are required to take a course that I teach as well, which is called Reading the Biblical Tradition, which teaches them religious literacy, how to read sacred texts in a way that's responsible to the text, but also realizing that these are not simply archaic bits of knowledge, but they're powerful sources of wisdom that speak very strongly to today's young people. And then finally, students are also required to take a course in ethics. So equipping students to whatever field they go into, lawyers, doctors, law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics. We need good, ethical people in all these professions. This is how we transform the world, by bringing moral people that are striving to lead lives of virtue, and they go out and use their gifts and talents to contribute to the common good through their chosen professions. And that's why I said it really is a privilege at St. Mary's to work with students along that journey at a key moment in their lives.
Yeah, my son, he majored in philosophy down at Ave Maria University in Florida, and
Yes.
so he quite enjoyed that component of study and life. So you talked about having children. Is there a meal that is Dad's go-to, or are you in the kitchen or on the barbecue, or?
Well, I would say that my wife is an exceptional cook. So we sort of have a division of labor in our family, and we realized, and the kids would all agree, that my wife's much better at making healthy food that's delicious than I'll ever be. So usually I do most of the food shopping, my wife does the cooking, and then my kids and I do most of the cleanup afterwards. But I would say my go-to meal is, I do a fair amount of barbecuing, so hamburgers and hot dogs that's easy and fun to do. But my kind of signature meal is, and goes back to my days being a starving grad student, is I make penne alla vodka. So simple to make, and the kids just, a little bit of fresh Parmesan cheese, and the kids gobble it up. And I grew up, when I was in high school, I was a track and field runner and a cross-country runner. And whenever in a Catholic high school, we used to gather as a team for team meals on Friday nights before the big meet on Saturday mornings. And our go-to meal as our track team was always these big spaghetti pasta dinners. We had to carb up for our race the next morning. I know that in a lot of diets, carbs are kind of out of favor, but for me, I've always been a big fan of carbohydrates. So
they are yummy. So you talked about it earlier, but what advice do you give your 18-year-old self, knowing that a lot of young men are struggling even what a man is today? So
and it's a non-abstract question, because I work with 18-year-olds who are first-year students at St. Mary's, and my eldest daughter will be 14 next month. So we're now entering the teenage years in my household. So this will be an important question in a few years as they get older. But I would tell them, or my 18-year-old self, there is a great quote from one of my favorite theologians, and this is Irenaeus. And Irenaeus says, "The glory of God is man fully alive." And it's not meant to be, gender specific, just men, but God is most glorified when God's creations, us as humans, we're fully alive. So God wills what's best for us. God wants us to be happy, as I say, to use our gifts and our talents in a way that brings us joy and also contributes to the community around us. So if I was talking to 18-year-old Peter, I would say, life right now, I'm in my early 40s, as I look backwards, I can see the hand of God guiding me through in hindsight. But at the time, it's immensely confusing. You're not sure what the next step is. And when I was, I mentioned I was in graduate school, doing well academically, discerning a potential call to the priesthood and how I can best serve God. And I got some wonderful advice from the vocation director at the Capuchins, a guy named Brother Tim Jones. And Brother Tim once, he said, "Peter," he says, "you've been on vocational retreats, you've read all our brochures, how else can I help you? I'm not sure what else I can tell you at this point to help you make a decision." He says, "So what's holding you back? How can I help you?" And I said, to be honest, I said, my fear is that, let's say I join religious life for the call to the priesthood, and one day I'm at the altar celebrating Mass, and I'm at the point of the consecration, I'm elevating the Eucharist, and I look out to the congregation, and I see a large family in the front row, and I think, oh, I made a mistake with my vocation. That's what I was meant to do. I was meant to have a family. Or I have a family, I'm in the front row of church, I look up at the priest at the altar and say, oh, that was my vocation. I made a mistake. That's what I was called to do. And Brother Tim said to me, and this is the advice, I'm getting there eventually, and Brother Tim said to me, he said, "Peter," he says, "I don't think God works that way. God's not trying to trick us." And when he told me that, it actually took a lot of the pressure off my shoulders. That somehow a fear of making a mistake, but rather to sort of, trust my gut, or, enter into the quietness of prayer, what Ignatius calls the discernment of spirits, and how is God working in my life? And I realize, that while we may not know often what the exact route may be, what the exact answer is, God is always speaking to us. What we need to do is learn how to train ourselves so we can listen to how God's speaking to us, whether it's through people, through circumstances, through events. Where do I feel joy? What gives me life? What makes me excited? Those are important ways that God is interacting and trying to communicate with us. So my advice to any 18-year-old is to just simply listen. Listen to how God is speaking to you. And if you can listen to how God is speaking to you, God's not trying to confuse us. Once again, God wants us to be happy and to be joyful and to find fulfillment and purpose in this life. And a lot of times we've forgotten how to listen. The art of sitting in silence and the art of reflecting in prayer. We're so busy doing and going or being entertained that we lost that sacred art of just being still and humble before the Lord. I think that's something that it's simple, but I can actually be quite profound, especially for young people.
Yeah, and that's where they need to lose their cell phone charger for a couple days and or go somewhere where there is no cell service, and it does help the soul quite a bit and help the clarity.
Well, as I told you already, my spirituality is heavily Franciscan in its orientation. But to me, moving to Calgary, we have the world's greatest backyard. So oftentimes when I feel stressed, overwhelmed, our campus at St. Mary's, we're right next door to Fish Creek Provincial Park. Beautiful place to go. Or oftentimes I take my children, usually for us as a family, what we do is we call our Saturday is our family day. So what we do is, and this comes from when I was a graduate student, just starting my graduate career in theology. Our first orientation, our graduate director told us, he was a biblical scholar, and he says, when I was in your shoes decades ago, the advice that I got, and I still remember I passed on to you, and I remember I'm passing on to your virtual audience, he said, honor the Sabbath. Honor the Sabbath. So in our family, our tradition has always been on Saturdays, my wife does no work, I do no schoolwork, the kids wake up at the breakfast table, we say, what do we want to do today? And oftentimes it's, let's go for a hike, let's go to the lake, let's go to the beach, but it's just being intentionally together, and as you mentioned, cell phones are turned off, there's no iPads, it's just simply communing with each other and communing with God, and those are really sacred moments for us. Pope Francis has a great quote. Someone asked Pope Francis about tips for parenting, and Pope Francis said, and I quote, he says, the most important thing a parent can do is to waste time with your child. So just spending time, being fully present with my family, that is how I can discern God, and when I'm in nature, it's that much more profound. And
that's also one of the best crime prevention tools out there. So if you want, because we get asked all the time, how do I keep my kids out of crime? You are describing the number one top tool for keeping your kids out of trouble with the law, out of drugs, out of all of the trappings that lead down the wrong path. So thank you for that. So there's one other segment that I do, and Jeff Cavins talks about riding with your posse. So who are your go-to saints? Who are the ones that you, I'm guessing St. Francis of Assisi might be in there, but I could be wrong.
Well, how much time do you have? Because I have a whole litany of saints.
Well, no. These are your go-to daily guys. So
yeah, it's funny because I find that as I get older, at different stages of my life, I'm drawn to different saints or different spiritual traditions for different reasons. So I would say, as much as I have a place of honor and reverence for St. Francis of Assisi, and I'll mention as a quick aside, when I take my students for 2 weeks to Rome for this Rome travel study course, during the 2 weeks we spend 3 days in Assisi. And when we finish the tour, and I ask my students, what was your favorite part of Rome? Almost all of them always say, being in Assisi. So Francis he has a place of honor and prestige. However, one of the contemporaries of St. Francis, someone I've really grown to admire and draw inspiration from the last several years, is St. Dominic, the founder of the Order of Preachers. And actually, in full disclosure, I am part of a group of lay Dominicans here in Calgary. So going through that formation experience and learning about Dominic and Dominican spirituality, which in many ways is a complement to Francis. Dominic, like Francis, wanted to reform the church primarily through his living witness. So leading a life of simplicity. And like Francis, Dominic wanted to literally live out the gospel. So that life of simplicity. And like Francis, a life of joy. But whereas Francis was focusing on tangible, concrete acts of charity, Dominic realized that we need to be working at the universities in the cities. So Dominic and the Dominicans saw intellectual formation as a key part of the Dominican charism. So for me, St. Dominic de Guzman, who embodies the mendicant tradition, the sense of simplicity, but also twinning that and combining it with learning. And it's not just learning for a sense of self-aggrandizement or pride, but one of the hallmarks of Dominican spirituality is contemplation, so you can be a more effective preacher and share your learning, sharing your wisdom. And for someone who is an educator, I find that model and it's very powerful. So right now, St. Dominic de Guzman is my current saint that I look up to and invoke his intercession. And of course, Dominican spirituality encompasses several major thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, the great theologian of the church, the angelic doctor. But also the Dominican tradition encapsulates people like Catherine of Siena, that profoundly fiery preacher, that laywoman. And also Dominican spirituality also incorporates Père Giorgio Frassati, who was a young person, as Pope John Paul II called him, the man of the Beatitudes. As a young person, embodied and lived out and gives us a living model of how to live a life of the Beatitudes. So my cop-out answer is St. Dominic and plus this extended Dominican family. That's where I've been drawn these last few years.
That's awesome. And it is true that through your different seasons of life, you get closer to different saints. And
yeah.
You talk about Assisi. I've only been there once, and I was there with the high school rugby boys team, and but they all had the exact same feeling. There is a different vibe there, or whatever, that peacefulness. It's just absolutely incredible, and it's on the bucket list to go back with my loving bride one of these days, but.
It's yeah. I mean, if you make it back, I'll give you a few tips of cool places to go, because when I went to Rome for the second time, and I was going for a conference at the Vatican, and before I left, I asked my colleague Michael Duggan at St. Mary's because he spent time studying in Rome. So I said, Michael, I'm going to Rome. You live there. What are some off the beaten path, things that people may not know about that I should try to find time to visit? And he said, Peter, get to Assisi. And I said, okay, well, Assisi it's a small place, but it's also the largest. Where should I go? And he told me about just outside of Assisi. When Assisi got too overwhelming for Francis, he took his friars away on retreat. It's about 5 kilometers north of the city. And this is also a UNESCO heritage site. And these are the caves where Francis brought his friars to pray in.
Oh, wow.
And when I went there for the first time, the image I had in my mind was when Moses encountered the burning bush. and he was told to remove his sandals because he was on holy ground. When I was up at this retreat area outside of Assisi, where you see the place where Francis prayed and laid, I wanted to literally take off my shoes because this was holy ground. And my second quick Assisi story is when we were there in 2018 with St. Mary's. I'm going back in 2022, God willing, we can travel then. There was a group that was also in Assisi. We went for a mass at the Tomb of St. Francis, the lower crypt beneath the basilica. And we met a group there, and this floored me. They were a group of Franciscans from the Midwest US, and their whole entire ministry is bringing veterans, so military veterans, who are struggling with PTSD.
Oh, wow.
And they're not necessarily Catholic or even Christian, but just for a sense of healing, they would bring them on pilgrimages to Assisi to heal and to find inner peace. And we met this group and met this friar. It was something that I get goosebumps even thinking about it. Just that profound sense of peace that you find in Assisi. It's transcendent. It's well, God's dwelling place.
I may have to find out who they are because they sound like they'd be a good guest on a Dram with Friends. So
yeah, absolutely.
I wanna thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us in the pub today. I don't know if you know, being a history major, but the origin of whiskey is a Gaelic word called Ishkabaha, which means water of life. And my hope is that you continue to lead many souls to the true water of life. And we will definitely have to meet again offline in the pub as things open up here, because I'd love to hear more of the stories. And I really thank you for taking time.
Thank you, Sean. It's been my pleasure. When I first came to Calgary, I heard about the God Squad. So the work that you're doing is well known and celebrated. And I wish you nothing but God's blessings as you do God's work in Calgary. Beyond that, just a final plug to say that I think, unfortunately, for many years, St. Mary's as a university was busy developing and growing, which was good and healthy and necessary. But I think we've sort of lost a lot of connections to the community, the diocese. And so at this stage, St. Mary's, we are looking to collaborate and see how can we as an institution help others like the God Squad and those in your audience. How can we collaborate together to build the kingdom of God? So if any of you out there who are watching have ideas how we can collaborate, please reach out to me, let me know, because we want to work with everyone to really make St. Mary's in Calgary, our diocese, a dynamic witness to God's love and power and service to all.
You may be sorry you said that to me, so because we're making things happen, and we've got quite the mission going forward coming out of COVID, because we've got a new evangelization, and anything we can do to help you, let us know. And one of the things we're looking at doing to reach out to young people, I don't know, you said you're an outdoor guy. We're looking at disc golf and maybe encouraging some nights out with that, just to build that community and fellowship and awesome. Have that invitation for men to join in. So
yeah, and that's, I mean, this, I don't want to belabor the point too much, but one thing I think sometimes that gets neglected is we talk about people, young people especially, not being connected to the church or even falling away. But the reality is the young people I encounter in the classroom, they are asking big questions. Who am I? What is the meaning of life? So young people, they're searching. And I think, I'm not the first to say this, I think there really is a real, not to use the term lightly, but there's a pandemic, not of COVID, but a pandemic of loneliness, people being disconnected. So if there's a way we can find to bring people together in a healthy, positive way. People want connection with other people, but also they want connection with what's real and what's true, with the divine. So if there's ways we can bring that together, I think that's a powerful model for evangelization and a powerful model for witnessing what our faith is all about. So
Awesome.
I look forward to continuing the conversation with you, Sean, because this is, I think, is the Holy Spirit at work.
I do too, and we will definitely keep talking. Good night.
Great. Cheers.
I hope you have enjoyed this episode of A Dram with Friends. Like and subscribe. Go to all podcast platforms to look for it on podcast, or go to godsquad.ca to support our mission.